there, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Bible. Today I've got some interesting new rules from Yahweh for you. Some rules I wasn't even aware of before I read them. Some of them are actually good, believe it or not. Yahweh is going to get some positive points today. Not as many as he will bad points, but we'll get to them as we come along. If you are joining us for the first time, well, what we do here, this show, The Good, the Bad, and the Bible, is the only show you will find that goes through the Bible and talks about what is good and what is bad in it. That may sound strange to you, but there is both good and bad contained within this book. It is written by men, after all. You can't expect it to be perfect, can you? Well, I can believe that some of you absolutely do, because I used to be one of them. I used to be a Christian who took this book very seriously, but I found out Christianity isn't true, and this book isn't true. So I have come back to share my knowledge, what I've learned as I grew up being a missionary kid, being homeschooled with a military chaplain who had been to Bible seminary, and I've been taught by many different Bible teachers and such. And I've come back to show what is worth paying attention to and what should be considered the red flags in here. Because you shouldn't believe everything you read and everything you hear. And if you want to hear about my deconversion process, what all I went through and how I was raised and everything, there are plenty of videos about it that you can go watch. Here, we are diving into the Bible and we have a great time. And so without any further ado, my name is Rogan and you are watching The Mysterious Stoner in Ebola. Let's begin. So we have 3 different things we're going to talk about and dwell on today. The first one is right in the beginning of chapter 17. I thought was really interesting and worth taking a look at. Notice this. God is talking to Abraham and Aaron, and he's making up a new rule again. And he says, "What man soever there be of the house of Israel that killeth an ox or lamb or goat in the camp, or that killeth it out of the camp, and bringeth it not unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, to offer an offering unto the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, blood shall be imputed unto that man. He hath shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people." Now, if you remember back, do you remember that phrase, cut off from among his people? It has several different possible meanings, and none of them are good at all. So this is a serious deal. This is a serious punishment to attach to what has just been commanded. But what was commanded? This is the King James. It's not very easy to understand. Allow me to translate. So, when someone wants to kill an animal for dinner, perhaps, it doesn't really say for what reason. The reason doesn't seem to matter at all. For whatever reason, if you killed an animal of an ox, a lamb, or a goat, or shed blood basically of any kind, you had to bring an offering to the temple every single time. You want to cook burgers on the grill tonight? Well, you'll have to kill Bessie, but you will also have to take an offering to church before you do that. Every single time. Oh, you want lamb chops? Same thing. You want goat stew? Same thing. God demands basically an offering tax every time you kill one of your animals. Why is that really a big deal? Because livestock was the main form of currency back in those days. It was a very serious deal. I'm not going to get into what the actual offering was. I'm not even quite sure what the offering was, because it doesn't quite plainly, it doesn't lay it out here. You can read it for yourself, chapter 17, Leviticus. But this is to be done every time. It seems very demanding of God to have an offering for every time you kill an animal. I mean, this is part of daily life we're talking here. Animals are killed regularly. And God wants a piece of every single one that's killed every single time. Like, that sounds a bit greedy to me. I mean, why does God need that sort of thing on a regular basis? God doesn't need money. He really doesn't need blood. If he is in charge of making the rules, he can change the rules. And besides, what if the animal that is being killed for a poor family that needs every scrap of food to get by? And God still wants a piece of that, so he's taking away from the poor. Like, shouldn't the church be helping the poor instead? Shouldn't some of these offerings be like being circulated around back to the poor people? That's not, I don't recall reading anywhere in my history. Maybe we'll come across it in the Bible as we're reading. There are certain things for poor people that they can do. There are certain laws in place to help them out, but nothing I'm aware of as far as offerings to the tabernacle being given to poor people. And, as if that's not bad enough, it doesn't matter what your financial circumstances, it doesn't matter if it's the last ox, the last goat, the last lamb that you have. God wants a piece of it. If you don't give it to him, the punishment is that the person responsible will be cut off from among his people, which can mean either kicked out of Israel, they are no longer part of the Israelites, or they could be executed, or there was one or two other things, but those were the main biggest two punishments. Like, this is a big deal to skip out on this offering for God over such a mundane, regular action. God takes his offerings and his blood a bit too seriously. And we're going to see him do so even more in the next rule that we come to. This rule, however, caught me a wee bit off guard, because I wasn't sure how to take it at first. Like, is this a good one or a bad one? And I had to research it, because I honestly did not know the answer. I only had what my old Christian self would have told me, which would be, believe what it says, because that's what the parents said. But of course, I'm not going to do that. So I researched it. I researched this rule. What is the rule? The rule is this. Verse 10, and whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eateth any manner of blood, I will even set my face against that soul that eateth blood, and will cut him off from among his people. And then God goes into this thing about how the life of the flesh is in the blood, even though it's a little bit more complicated than that. But we'll hold off on that, because that's God's opinion. And you need more than blood for a body to be alive. But let's look at this rule. God didn't want people to eat blood. And he threatened them with whatever being cut off from among the people means. Something very bad. So God takes this very seriously, right? Is it actually bad to consume blood? Of course, Christians will tell you, and anyone who believes this Bible will tell you, well, yes, Yahweh said don't do it, so obviously it's bad. Well, I looked it up, and come to find out, the answer to that question is a little bit more complicated than just a flat yes or no. Because I learned that, well, for one thing, to a certain degree, yes, it is unhealthy for you to drink blood. I'm not a doctor. Don't take my advice medically. Do your own research, please. But there is a certain amount, to a certain point, that you will start to get sick. But if you only take a little bit, it actually doesn't harm you, as long as there are no diseases in the blood of the person that you're taking this from. Why am I talking about human blood? Well, it is actually different than, well, a bit different than consuming animal blood. And plus, one of the articles I read about consuming blood was, it was talking about the condition of vampirism, or the modern day medical mention of it. I wasn't looking for that specifically. I was just trying to find out about blood consumption in general, if it was good or bad. What the doctors and professionals had to say. But when it came to animal blood, if it was, if it's not contaminated with disease or anything of that nature, then a little bit can actually be beneficial to consume, according to what I read. Again, I'm not a doctor. Don't take my word for it. Don't consume blood. I don't recommend it. But it seems here Yahweh has a fairly decent recommendation here to not consume blood. Overall. That is ultimately the safest route to go here. But telling them, or threatening them with the punishment of cutting them off from the people, seems a bit harsh. Because honestly, consuming enough blood, regardless of whether it's contaminated or not, it will kill you, because there's a lot of iron in it. And too much of that will, you'll be in pain before you die, if you die, but that's why you don't want to consume very much, ever, at a time. And you should really, 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 really know what you're doing if you are going to go through with that. And there are other religions that do include blood consumption. So if a stranger, if we are trying to be civilized in this modern day era and trying to see how tolerant God is here, well, according to God, the Yahweh God, if a stranger is traveling through Israel and they consume blood, whether it be for religious reasons or they happen to know of the slight health benefits or whatever, for whatever reason, they will be cut off from among their people if caught consuming blood. I feel like the most sensible translation of that little phrase would be to kill the person because they're not an Israelite. But I can't be 100% sure because of the different meanings that they tie to this phrase. But either way, this comes across as a harsh punishment. And to do it of a stranger, like, it's one thing to blatantly disrespect the laws of a land that you are visiting. If you are a tourist in the country, you want to be respectful of what they do. That's just what you do when you go to a foreign country, because you don't want to get stuck there. You don't want the police to hold you there for doing something that is legal back in your country but illegal there. So that's fair. But I mean, if a person is going to consume blood in private or whatever, like they're not going out of their way to offend people with it and whatnot, is it really worth cutting him off, whether physically or just immediately booting him out of the country? Whatever the punishment entails, it seems a bit harsh to me. So, with this law, it's a thumbs down for the punishment, really. I mean, your country, you do what you want. But, this is tied in with religion and such, and it's being intolerant of other people's perspectives who could be around you or who could just be visiting. And, you want to be respectful of your guests as well if you want them to visit again. And with foreign countries, you want to be friendly towards the people of other countries that you are allies with, right? Although God wasn't really too keen on Israel having a whole lot of foreign allies, but that's a whole different subject. So, don't eat blood. Oh, okay, that's like a half decent rule that I can give it up here for its usefulness, because it is useful. But the punishment is it's very narrow-minded. It's very intolerant. So that rough one. But now we come to a grand bit of a highlight, a lengthy stretch of where God drags out a very detailed law that he could have said in one little sentence. But it's a good law that he produces right before tripping himself up again. And it's going to lead us into quite the controversial little topic. So, we arrive in chapter 18. And God provides this law that lasts from verse 6 all the way to verse 19. Or at least I believe that according to the visuals, that is how long this chunk goes, this entire law. The law simplified is do not have incest. No incestual relations. That is an excellent law because there are very negative physical ramifications of it. The British royalty in the past and many other royalties in different countries used to make incestuous relations a major thing within the royalty. They said to try and keep the family line strong. But over time, they discovered that it's actually quite the opposite. When you interbreed with your own relatives, it actually weakens the family line. And offspring can be born with more and worse physical conditions or mental conditions, and it's really not a good idea. It really should not be done. It's not wise. And Yahweh goes into very extensive detail in all the different directions to not perform incest, to try and cover all the bases, it seems. And that's great. I mean, I suppose you can't be too careful. And I even highlighted everything he said there that I agreed with in green just to make it an extra point. But then we come to something controversial. Well, it's controversial because there are some verses shoved in between this whole chunk of anti-incestuous commandments and this other commandment that we're about to come into. We finish these commandments about thou shalt not commit incest. Great. Points for God. And it goes on to say, moreover, thou shalt not lie carnally with thy neighbor's wife to defile thyself with her. Okay, great. Don't sleep with your neighbor's wife. Also a good rule. Thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Moloch. That is a foreign god that took infant sacrifice, infant human sacrifice. Okay. Good rule for that. And then he suddenly says, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. So, whoa. First we're talking about incest. Then we're talking about sleeping with the neighbor's wife. Then we're talking about human child sacrifice. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about what sounds like, if you take it at face value, bear with me if you know where I'm going with this, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. What does that sound like? If you're talking to a man and you say, don't lie with a man like you do with a woman, what does that sound like is being said to you? It sounds like it's like they're saying don't be homosexual. This is very controversial, obviously, because being open, sexually open, is highly looked upon today. And it's great. I'm bisexual myself. And, I encourage openness and being in touch with your true self. And for a very long time, Christians used to take this verse as meaning that God is against homosexuality. And so they would be against homosexuality for a very long time. My parents, very, very anti-gay. Not the kind who go out and picket, but not too far removed. Or not too terribly far removed. And I used to be like them on that same level. I obviously changed because I'm able to realize that I'm not even straight myself. Like they are, I guess. You can't really tell with people, well, always anyways, who hate on gays, but some of them are secretly closeted gays themselves. It's kind of strange how they're not being honest with themselves. But, well, it's a lot of them have a lot to lose and are afraid to be honest. But that's what happens when you follow lies as opposed to the truth. Truth sets you free. Lies keep you tied down. But lately, coming back to this verse, some Christians have been digging into this verse. They've tried to get into the original Hebrew context of what this verse really means. And I read the perspective of how they try to explain that this is not anti-homosexual, which I found hard to believe. You see, I read to you in order the rules that come in this chapter. The anti-incestuous laws start in verse 6 and they end in verse 19. And then verse 20, it talks about not sleeping with the neighbor's wife. In verse 21, it talks about not doing human sacrifice. In 22, it says, don't lie with a man like you would with a woman. And these Christians who try to explain this away will say, according to what I read, that, it doesn't mean that to actually have sex. It means to just lie down like you're lying down to bed. In part of it. But then this other part, which I still could not find how they tied it together, they said that what this is actually saying is that you shouldn't have incestuous relations. No. You shouldn't have homosexual relations within your family. So you shouldn't have incestuous homosexual relations, is what this verse is saying, according to some Christians. And if it was right after all the different ways Yahweh was saying to not have incestuous relations, I could buy that. I could understand much better where they would come from. I still might not completely agree, but I could lean towards accepting that as a theory. The problem is, there's two verses in the way that are completely different from incest. I mean, one of them isn't about incest at all. It's not about sex, but it has nothing to do with the relatives. And the other one, I mean, that's human sacrifice. That's completely different. Whole different ballgame. Why are we switching topics 3 times and then circling back to say, oh yeah, by the way, don't have homosexual incest? Hold on. It would make a lot more sense if God was trying to be smart, which a lot of Christians try to paint God as being smart. So, if he is trying to be smart, okay, it makes sense for him to say, you know what, just stay away from blood overall. Don't even consume it. It makes sense for him to say, don't commit incestuous relations. Yes, I agree with this. But then to say, don't have incestuous homosexual relations. I should clarify, I am not promoting any kind of incest. I am not promoting homosexual incest. But the reason why incest is bad is because of the offspring issue. The homosexuality that does not produce. You can't reproduce when you're gay. It just doesn't work like that. So, sure, if it were right after the other verses, like I said, yes, I could accept that. Okay. But it's separated completely by 2 whole different rules. And what makes it even worse is that God said, I am not the author of confusion. He said that. He also said this verse. He also allowed mankind to translate it multiple times to eventually get into English. His holy word, inspired, and written by men, his chosen men. Let me ask you, Christians, regardless of how you take this Bible verse, there is confusion about this. Christians say, this verse means this. Other Christians say, it means that. You know both sides. How is a God who says he is not the author of confusion perfectly willing to allow humans to mistakenly translate this Bible to get to this verse and allow Christians for so long to take it the wrong way? If God is fine with homosexuality, Christians have been very, very, very terrible to homosexuals. They've been absolutely heinous. And if God is okay with homosexuality, why is it just till now that Christians are taking a deeper look into the Bible and saying, oh yes, it actually means that God is okay with this. We didn't realize that until now. Please, we need to accept the gays. We need to let them in. We need to be fine with it. I'm not saying they shouldn't be accepting. I'm saying it's fucking bullshit that it took the fucking followers of the almighty, perfect God, who is not the author of confusion, to figure out that God allowed humans to fuck up his work and persecute people. He allowed his own people to persecute gays who he supposedly naturally made in his own image, because he makes all of mankind in his own image. He has been allowing Christians and other such religious type people who follow the Bible to be dicks to people just for being of a different sexual preference. He didn't step down and say, hey, stop it. You need to fucking behave. This is not what I meant when I said, he who lies with a man like a woman, it's an abomination. He didn't say that. He didn't stop anyone. He didn't come down and clarify that shit. He waited for some guy to decide to look at this verse even closer, and that guy figured it out. How convenient for the Christians to come up with that. That's fucking bullshit. I don't buy that God had it wrong or Christians had it wrong all along. What the fuck? Fuck that shit. I am not the author of confusion. Bullshit. God allows confusion like this to happen all the time, and this is a prime example. And so what if God is the other way? What if God is anti-homosexual? What kind of person does that make him sound like? We've already seen that he's intolerant of people who want to eat blood, who are from different cultures and different ways of life. He wants to cut them off from his people, whatever that means. Whether it be kill them or ban them from the country. This guy is harsh. And for him to allow his words, his holy, infallible, basic instructions before leaving Earth, to be mistranslated and mistaken by his own people for many years, allowing them to persecute others because of a misunderstanding in one verse. That doesn't show me failure on humans' part. That shows me failure on God's part to not clarify, to not clear away the confusion that he allowed to happen. If this God is real, he is terrible at keeping his word true and clear so that people can understand it. The Bible was translated into English so that people could understand it and not be confused. The people read it and only get more confused. They get into arguments. They fight each other. They kill each other. They hate each other over misunderstandings in this book. And God never steps in to clarify. He lets humans do everything. Everything. Isn't that just a little bit suspicious to you? I'm sorry if I come off as overbearing and strong about this, but I took this seriously. I believed this with all my heart. And I wasted a lot of years believing it. I'm not a professional Bible teacher. I'm just a guy who's lived a strange, different life. And I've learned some of the more unpleasant truths about life. One of them is that the Holy Bible is not so holy. It's a holy piece of shit for the most part. I'm just a signpost here to warn people. Think before you believe. That is all I have for you for today. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. Like, subscribe, share if you know other people that enjoy this type of talk. Stay safe, my friends. Until next time, farewell.